All right, this is Marty Wilson speaking. I'm sitting at the Monroe County Historical Association with Don Baylor. It's May 13th, 2022, and Amy and Tanya are here with me, and we're going to talk to Don about his life in the Poconos and his interest in things aquatic. So Don, let's start with where and when you were born.
I was born at in the hospital in East Stroudsburg in 1945. My parents had been here for a while.
First generation of your parents?
Right. My mother was raised on a farm in Kreiskyville, and my father was raised on a farm in Bartonsville, back behind Bartonsville.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and your dad, you were telling me earlier, had a car dealership.
Yeah, my father, he was a pilot, and he was teaching flying in Wilkes-Barre. And then he got the SO company to build a garage because they would build an apartment over top of it, and that's where we initially lived, over an SO gas station.
Where was that?
Where on 611 where Ertl business is now. My father sold the business to Ertl, and eventually he started selling Saabs. And I think he started selling Saabs because his interest in flight and aircraft. Saabs were made by the Swedish Aircraft Company. So he, I believe, was the first dealer of imported automobiles in the area. And then he picked up Volvo, the other Swedish car, and sold those for a number of years. At various times he picked up other dealerships, but oh my goodness. I should put that on airplane mode. Sorry about that.
So, so you grew up and went to local schools and eventually developed some kind of interest in streams, waterways.
Right. I was interested in fishing from the time I was a little kid, and I don't know why. My father did nothing but work. I had no mentor, and back in those days, fly fishing was a big secret, so different from today. There's so much information today, but there were a few experts in town back in those days, but you almost had to be a blood relative or a longtime friend for them to share their secrets. But I just, for some reason, was intrigued by it, and I was self-taught, which today hardly anybody will go through what I went through because there's so much information and it's so freely available. But not when I was a kid. I was crossing the swinging bridge from Stroudsburg Park at the point where I couldn't catch trout on bait anymore, and I saw two guys catching trout on flies. So I went home and told my mother I had to make some trout flies. I had no idea what I was doing. I had bait hooks, fine telephone wire, and she gave me a feather pillow to tear apart, and I made some flies. No vise, no tools, So anyway, I knew where the stream made a dog leg. I could get out there and feed these flies that I tied into a good run, and I caught 3 trout. And that
On these homemade flies.
on these homemade flies, yeah. And that kind of set me off for life. I was always intrigued by the life in a trout stream, the insects. And
how old were you when this happened?
I was probably about 9 or 10 when that happened.
Were you naturally good at biology in school?
Yeah, I would say it was one of my favorite subjects in school. Yeah. And so I eventually found out that I had an uncle in Lehighton who was a fly tyer, an avid outdoorsman, fly fisherman. And so my mother took me there, and that was like the biggest Christmas in my life, even. That was probably in July, because he sat me down, showed me how to tie flies, gave me a homemade vise and the tools, and he always had chickens. I thought the chickens were for eggs. No, they were for the feathers. He raised chickens for the beautiful feathers, and he took almost every neck patch that he had, cut it in half, and I went home the happiest kid in the world that day. So that really got me started.
So where did you fish at the Poconos?
Well, I lived across from the Pocono Creek, so most of my fishing as a kid was on the Pocono Creek until until I could drive, and then I explored, and there are very few tiny little trout streams in the Poconos that I haven't fished at one time or another. The Broadhead is my favorite now.
So you still fish?
I still fish.
Are there still fish in the streams?
Yes, some of our streams are probably as good as they've ever been, the Broadhead in particular. Broadhead is one of the most historic sites, fly fishing sites, as far as the history of the sport in the country. Late 1800s, early 1900s, Broadhead was the destination in the country for anglers, fly fishing writers, celebrities came to Henryville. Mm-hmm. There were numerous hotels along the Broadhead and farmhouses that housed mainly fly fishermen to fish the Broadhead. So I learned eventually that I grew up where fly fishing probably has its richest history right here. You know, the Catskills claim to be the birthplace, and when I first went there I thought I was visiting the holy water, but I've eventually learned that my home water on the Broadhead is probably equally historic.
Okay. So you described sort of the fly fishing community around here sort of as a club, and that you had to know somebody to get. So did you ever get in? Did you work your way into that club?
I think I did eventually. Yeah, I eventually got to know some of the regulars, and some of the guys that I always envied because they had beautiful bamboo fly rods made by a local rod maker, which I never hoped to have, and now I do. And because I've collected a lot of memorabilia for a history display at the Broadhead Creek Heritage Center on the history of fly fishing in the Poconos, and I've written a book about the historic Broadhead. So
how did you go from this interest in fly fishing and streams to being an English teacher? What was that?
Well, in college, I just had some professors. I was undecided. I had some professors, English professors, that just fired me up about literature, and I majored in literature, majored in English, and enjoyed teaching it for 30 years, although it was a lot of work, grading all the papers.
Where'd you go to college?
I went to Mansfield. Originally, I thought I was going to major in music. That's why I went to Mansfield. It was a good music school at the time, but that didn't suit me. So I taught English, and the way I got into the biology was kind of strange. I taught 2 years and was drafted. One of the few teachers in the area that was drafted when Vietnam was hot. I was fortunate I didn't go to Vietnam. I spent my Army time at Fort Lewis, Washington. When I came back, one of my good fishing friends was Dr. Henry Fremont, who was head of the biology department at East Stroudsburg University. And I took some graduate classes at Lehigh and back at Mansfield when I got out of the Army, and at Bloomsburg and at ESU, but I didn't have a convenient place to commute and get an English master's. My original ambition was to teach English at the college level, but that plan kind of got ruined by the Army. So my good fishing friend was Henry Fremont, and he knew that I was, intensely interested in stream life, and he suggested I use the GI Bill and get a master's in biology. And I found out that by taking a half-year sabbatical at half pay, using the GI Bill, and getting an assistantship, I'd make more money not working and going to school for a year. So I got a master's in biology, and it was all aquatic. I concentrated on all aquatic. That led to joining up with 2 partners in a little business called Aquatic Resource Consulting, which we started shortly after I finished my master's in 1980. And both my partners recently retired, so I'm on my own for a couple of years, but we've done a lot of work and won a few things for water quality and the environment over those years.
How does that company work? I mean, how do you improve the water quality of the Poconos?
Well, originally we thought we would just offer scientific management to fishing clubs, because there are a lot of them here in the Catskills, which we did. But it grew over time to where we did a lot of work for engineering firms that don't have their own biologists. For years, I did the aquatic invertebrates for Monroe County's water quality study, Pike County's water quality study, and we do a lot of studies of possible pollution events. Just to give you an example, when Great Wolf was first built in the Poconos, their sewage treatment malfunctioned and they had a serious pollution problem, and we got the contract to monitor that afterward for several years until it straightened out. I monitor, for years I monitored Mount Airy Lodge, I monitored Mount Poconos sewage treatment plant, and I discovered some problems and have helped get some problems fixed over the years as far as water quality.
Who hires you?
Well, both counties have hired me, but FX Brown Engineering, we worked for an engineering company in Maryland for a number of years. Environmental groups, Trout Unlimited, Watershed Associations, and even on occasion individuals who live on a stream and have a concern about it. Fishing clubs, here and in the Catskills.
Does DEP ever?
No, we do the kind of thing that DEP does privately.
Okay.
So obviously, I know the biologists at our regional office of DEP and communicate with them and make sure I'm up to date on their protocols and so forth.
So, is this the connection that you have with the Broadhead watershed?
Yeah, I was involved when the Watershed Association first started, and ironically, I opted not to be on the board initially because I thought I might do work for them and it would be a conflict of interest. And I didn't do any work for them for a long time, and then I joined the board, and since I've been on the board, I've done work for the Watershed Association. I'm working on a grant right now. The Watershed Association was funded to do an upgrade of a section of the Broadhead Creek, and so I'm working right now on a program for the Broadhead Watershed Association.
So you mentioned earlier that some of the streams are just as good now as they were ever.
I think so.
Overall in the Poconos, the status of the streams, the river, do you do work in the river?
I haven't done any work on the Delaware, but I've done work on a lot of the streams. The Pocono Creek is a Class A wild trout stream. The Broadhead is still an excellent stream. In fact, as I said, we're considering trying to upgrade the status of a section of the upper Broadhead because it is so good. Our samples suggest that it is so good. And it's a very popular fishery. It's, there are a lot of historic fishing clubs in the Poconos, on Swiftwater, on the Broadhead, and a number of other streams that are going as strong as ever because the resource is as good as it is. Yeah.
So what do you think of the future of the streams in the Poconos?
Well,
with all this growth, it's got to have an impact.
Yeah, there are threats definitely from the growth. The greater studies show that when impervious surface in a watershed exceeds a certain percentage, you have impact, and so I think we have to be careful. I mean, we have a spurt of growth could cause an increase in impervious surfaces, warehouses, and so forth, that inevitably have an impact because they cause more runoff thermal, climate change, thermal changes could be detrimental. So there are some instances where there are impacts. There are some that we've improved and some that we haven't been able to do much about.
Are you optimistic for the future?
I'm skeptical about, there's such a push to grow business and grow industry for tax revenue and so forth, that I think sometimes not enough concern is given to the environment in the Poconos is different from the environment, for example, in the Lehigh Valley. The Poconos are not suited to the same type of development that other areas are, because we have steep slopes, we have excellent, exceptional water resources, and we're probably not suitable for just any kind of industry and development. And there's that conflict, of course. We want growth, we want jobs, we want tax revenue, but a lot of us don't want the price that we might pay environmentally.
Over the course of your career as a marine biologist, has there been one or two cases that really stood out as one that you and your company really had an impact upon or improved the water quality?
Yes, as I said, we've won a few. One that comes to mind is the paper mill on the lower Broadhead. For some years, they were having a pretty significant impact, to the point where at low flows, the whole stream bed of the Broadhead, the lower Broadhead, down through that Shawnee area was sewage fungus. It looked terribly nasty. For the last 4 years or so, and I continue to monitor it through an engineering firm, it is cleaned up. That was a big win. Forest Hills Run is an impaired stream. It's impacted. And years ago, through a grant, through the Watershed Association, I discovered a problem there. And through the Watershed Association negotiations and DEP and Penn Future, we got them to agree to do land application of their discharge. So that's probably going to be a significant improvement. The great wolf problem that we monitored, and it improved, it was solved. And we've done, some structural stream improvement projects that have definitely benefited.
Changing the course of the stream?
The trout population, on the Broadhead at what we call the High Bridge, where 191 crosses. We got a dramatic increase in the wild trout population there. At the National Wildlife Refuge in Cherry Creek, we did some design, they did the work, but we've got some dramatic increases in trout population, wild trout. The Pocono Creek in Tannersville, there are a number of places where habitat work has made a difference, and a number of places where we've got some pollution cleaned up over the years.
You were just talking about the paper mill. I noticed recently driving east on Route 80 to Delaware Water Gap. If you look off to the left, there's this brand new spillway coming down. Have you seen that on the side of the mountain?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I guess it's from that new development that they're building across 209 there.
Right, yeah, and I don't know much about that. I know that Stroudsburg's treatment plant was greatly improved, brought up to more state-of-the-art several years ago, partly through some monies available when Kalahari wanted to build and needed sewage treatment, and through various negotiations decided to ship it to Stroudsburg's plant, which gave them some funding to renovate their plant, which was outdated, probably had overflow problems during storm events, and now it's state of the art, and that's improved the lower Broadhead. Now, if we could get East Stroudsburg's plant upgraded at some point, that would be another plus.
So what is the status of the various plants, and what about all these turkey mounds? And do you see a real threat to?
Well, it depends how close they are and whether they have much of a buffer. If they're functioning properly, the in-ground treatment is fine.
Doesn't it have a lifespan?
They do, and they have to be renovated at some point. And I'm not an expert in all the different treatment methodologies, but as I said, Stroudsburg's treatment plant was a problem. It's been improved. Mount Pocono's treatment plant now doing land, just recently started doing land application, spray irrigation. During warmer months, they'll have to discharge in the wintertime when it's less harmful. Originally, we found that during a dry, hot summer, their discharge, for example, increased the stream temperature 10 degrees Fahrenheit, which is a significant impact just temperature-wise. So
I would never have thought.
No, I would not have either, but we put thermographs in and discovered that. And that of course is really a violation. A lot of these treatment plants that were permitted on very small, very cold headwater streams did not function to protect the stream, we found.
Do you know anything about the Water Gap treatment plant or the Shawnee treatment plant?
I do not. I have not looked at those, looked into those, no. The Shawnee is on the lower Broadhead, below the paper mill, so that one I don't know anything about.
By way of disclosure, I'm on the municipal authority of the Water Gap treatment plant. And as far as I know, ours is working, but that's why I was asking an expert.
Yeah, no, I haven't sampled that far down. Yeah. I know that if one is in Glen Park across the Broadhead from the East Stroudsburg plant, when the breeze is in that direction, it can be pretty devastating.
Shawnee too.
And I was taught when I took ecology of water pollution that if a plant is really working efficiently, that doesn't happen. So I think, and obviously the problem is grants and funding. Maybe this new infrastructure bill provides some grants for upgrading treatment plants, and hopefully, that could happen.
So we've been talking about one aspect of your life. We've sort of ignored lots of other parts of your life. But I know you have a lot of other interesting things to talk about. How did you get into art, for example? You never mentioned your art.
No, it's funny. When I was a kid, I was always interested in drawing, probably when I should have been studying. And I didn't take art in high school, although I probably devoured every book in the library on great artists and so forth, and was always interested. And in college, although I majored in English, I took a couple of courses in drawing and oil painting, and I worked for the art department. And that really piqued my interest, and I had one professor that even suggested that eventually I try to get some work represented in galleries in New York, which I never even thought of doing. But then I got married, then I got drafted, and I didn't do much for years. And about 10 years ago, my daughters bought me paints and materials to start painting again. And it has just been a transformative experience. I've just had a great time with it. Every trip I do out west or fishing trip wherever has a new dimension now. What might I want to paint? What scene might I want to paint?
Do you take your paints and?
No, I don't do on the spot. I take photographs and work from photographs and change what I need to change and borrow from other photographs. And I'm not good at inventing things. I have to import things if I want to change of scene. But I've just had a blast with it. I don't get to paint much year round because I'm still working, but in fall and winter, I get at it pretty diligently. I do anywhere from 9 to 15 works over a fall and winter when I'm not working.
And the music, is that still in your life?
Only as far as tremendous appreciation, not as far as performance, But yeah, I've been a music lover all my life. I love all kinds of music if it's good. And there's some local artists that I particularly like, and I still go to concerts. And I saw Three Dog Night at the Sherman a couple weeks ago. It was a great old group. Originally, when I was a kid, I was into folk music when everybody else was into rock and the Beatles. And classical, I really like classical music, still do. And a number of years ago, one of my daughters, I picked up her car to have it serviced, and she had a 6 CD changer in the car with classic rock in it. And so from that time on, I've been a fan of classic rock. I like all kinds of music if it's good. Yeah. Beethoven's a favorite, Copland, and just a lot of classic rock. My iPod is very busy.
You have any art shows lined up coming up?
I don't. I'm probably going to be a regular during October at the Broadhead Creek Heritage Center. And I had one back in February at the Conservation District building, the Kettle Creek Environmental Ed Center. Other than that, I don't have any lined up. I had an opportunity probably through the Pocono Arts Council to have one, but I've just been too busy to line up other exhibits. I should, because my house is full. I need to start selling. I've sold it at some of the...
That's something I've always wondered about artists, They keep producing work, but they don't sell as much as they, so the house becomes filled.
It is. My wife likes them all on the walls, so the walls are full. Overfull now. I have some that won't fit. So my house is kind of a gallery right now. And I do sell occasionally. I don't have a good vehicle for selling, and I'm not doing it for that, but it's really pleasing to me if somebody appreciates a work enough to want to print or an original. And when I had the show at the Heritage Center, I sold several originals and quite a few prints. And I think I have prints in all of the local fishing clubs on the Broadhead, which is I'm very proud of, because some of my trout prints and fishing scenes are represented in the clubhouses, which is pretty neat to me.
Yeah. So what's in the cards for you? Are you going to keep this business going for another 10 years?
I'm hoping within a couple of years to phase out of most of it. The Monroe County did find someone else. I was always worried when I quit, will the county study be able to continue? And this year they found someone else to do it. I'm still doing Pike County, and hopefully within a year or two, maybe they'll find someone else. I'll probably still do work here and there for old clients that...
But there's not another younger gentleman that's going to take over, or woman.
The program that I went through at ESU had a load of good aquatics courses. And when Dr. Hayes, my advisor, retired, they didn't replace him. Didn't replace someone with the expertise to do all those courses. Paul Wilson still does a stream ecology course, does a great job with it. Occasionally I help, but the program isn't there. So I don't see anybody getting fed into doing that in the area. They'll probably have to ship work out. I think Monroe County, they do 40-some sites a year. That was a huge job. I'm glad I don't have it. And they're sending it to somewhere in Susquehanna. There are engineering firms that are huge and have that kind of expertise as part of their work. So I'm hoping within a couple of years, because I want to paint and fish and not work so much. I'm 76, so I think it's about time.
Sounds like a plan. Sounds
Yeah.
like a good plan.
Yeah.
Well, you've lived a pretty fascinating life. Do you have any questions?
I do have a question. So, your early fishing, where did you get the supplies from? Did you go to Wyckoff's? Did they sell things like that? Where did you get your fishing rods? And...
Good question. There was a little shop on 8th Street, a sporting goods shop. And the owner was very sympathetic to a young boy trying to get into fly fishing. His name was Emerson McNichol, a great guy. I have great memories of him. And I would go down there with my allowance, my pittance of an allowance. I would walk down to Stroudsburg to buy a few feathers. And I remember one time, just for example, I wanted barred wood duck feathers, which were required for a lot of classic patterns. And so I picked a package. I didn't look at the price, and I bought a number of things, and I probably only had a couple dollars. I went home, and when I looked at the price on that package of wood duck feathers, it was far more pricey than I paid for the whole batch. But Mr. McNichol, did that kind of thing for me when I was a kid. So that was one guy that really helped foster. That shop eventually was taken over by another proprietor, who eventually was taken over by Jerry Dunkelberger, who of course moved across the street and expanded and became quite a business. There was a guy named John DeVivo who taught at Stroudsburg, who was an avid fly fisherman, and he fostered me as a kid, and he worked at Lim's part-time, Lim's Sport Shop, and so we got to know each other and shared patterns and techniques, and I eventually got in on the coterie of avid fly fishermen in town, and it's been nice.
Did you say that somebody locally made rods?
There was a bamboo rod maker on Lower Main Street, Lou Schauer. He came from St. Mary's, Pennsylvania, but he moved here in 1920 and was here until after the flood. He left in 56, probably because his Broadhead was devastated by the flood, and I'm sure his shop was inundated because it was on Lower Main Street. But he made beautiful bamboo fly rods. He made fly rods for a lot of the notable anglers that came here to fish. And I admired them when I was a kid. A lot of the local, especially the more well-to-do doctor and lawyer fly fishermen, had Lou Schauer rods. And he was also an expert fly fisherman, competed with some of the experts. Today I have a collection of several that I've collected for the history display, and a couple that I like so much that I fish with myself. So
it's not the kind of thing that wears out. You can use a 50-year-old fly rod.
Oh yeah, if they're maintained and taken care of, yeah, they're very functional. Some of his rods were, there were a lot of bamboo fly rods from back in the day that were pretty wimpy and I wouldn't use today, but I have a couple of his that really work well. Really work. I had one replica made of one of his that I fished with quite a bit. And he was acknowledged, he supposedly made rods for one of the presidents that fished here. I haven't been able to verify that. He made a fly rod for a famous artist and illustrator who summered in Bushkill, and he was acknowledged by some of the notable angling writers that came here. So, he was low production, so he didn't get well known in the broader, worldwide community, but he was very well known in the local area and made excellent rods. And incidentally, I talk about how secretive things were in those days. Dick Phillips, who's gone now, but was his neighbor on Lower Main Street, said that as a kid, Dick was the only one allowed in his rod making shop because it was big secret. It was like alchemy, how do you make these beautiful bamboo fly rods?
What about any of the other technical equipment that you need, the reels or like you said, people made their own flies. Was anything else produced locally? The thread mill, Holland thread mill on Lower Main Street,
most of the fly tyers all around ordered thread from Holland Thread. And the bamboo rods, the reels, there was somebody locally who made reels, but I don't know that they ever became popular on the market. The local ties, the importance of the local history is mainly that just everybody notable in fly fishing and trout fishing came here up until probably the flood of '55. The Broadhead, I would say without a doubt, it was one of the most notable trout fishing sites in the country in the 1800s and up until the '55 flood. Editors of Field and Stream, Broadway stars, prize fighters came to fish the Broadhead. Jack Kilrain and John L. Sullivan, before their epic prize fight, came to Henryville and fished the Broadhead. Louise Grudy was a great Broadway star in the 20s. She was a headliner in up to 10 Broadway shows. She fished the Broadhead. She had a summer home in Canadensis. So it's amazing the history that's here. There were a number of hotels built primarily to house fishermen that came here. The Park House, which was above Henryville, there was the Log Cabin Inn, which is still there but in disrepair, south of Canadensis. That was a notable fly fishing destination. There was one called, I can't think of it now, the Park House. There was another big one up below Canadensis that could house 200 guests, and that was built primarily to host fishermen and hunters who came here back in the early 1900s. Unfortunately, most of them have burned down.
I'm just imagining all those hotels that have capacity for all those fishermen. The streams get crowded. Is there enough waterways? Not so much.
I don't know. I mean, most of them had a section of private water just for their clients.
So each hotel had its own section.
Right. Yeah. There was one in Canadensis, the Albert House, which is famous for brook trout fishing back in the 1800s.
Where was that?
Was right in Canadensis. I don't know exactly where, but it was famous for brook trout fishing because all of those tributaries were loaded with brook trout and accessible by the public. And then in the late 1800s, clear cutting devastated the brook trout. And that's when a lot of the anglers moved to the Catskills. But in the late 1800s, brown trout were imported from England and Germany and revived the trout fishery. And by the early 1900s, it was famous for the brown trout fishery.
So what happened? I know you said the '55 flood, but then you said earlier that the waterways are just as good now as they were before. What?
Well, it took a lot of time for it to recover. I mean, the aquatic stream life takes at least up to 4 years to recover after a devastating flood. Took a long time for the streamside vegetation to regrow, which is important because the leaf litter is important food for aquatic bugs and shelter for them when they emerge and fly away. So over time, we recovered from the flood, except that the Corps of Engineers took a huge meander out of the Broadhead and straightened it in the trench below Antelomic. That has never recovered much habitat. A pipe dream of mine would be to get a couple $1 million to restore that stretch of the Broadhead. Probably won't ever happen, but yeah, it's nature, and it recovered gradually. The Broadhead, the lower Pocono through Stroudsburg has never quite recovered. It was so destabilized by that flood that every subsequent flood kind of rips and tears the Pocono. So the upper Pocono is still an excellent trout stream down near Stroudsburg. It's had trouble ever since the flood.
Yeah, my question though, I think, is more about why is there not the industry, the trout fishing industry, or maybe it is and I just am not aware of it.
There was not the industry simply because the focus in the Poconos became honeymooners and heart-shaped tubs.
Oh, yeah.
Penn Hills probably could have been a great fly fishing destination, but you know, the focus was different. If we had focused on the fly fishing industry the way the Catskills did, it probably would have been a booming industry here. It just was not the focus here. You know, the people. However, the clubs in the Poconos are certainly a source of revenue for, you know, our area. The fly fishing that's here. The public part of the Broadhead is extremely popular. I mean, oh, this winter, on a bitter winter day at Forever Green, I ran into two anglers. One of them was from Maryland, and one of them, I think, was from Massachusetts. Two brothers who decided to get together and fish the Broadhead at Forever Green. So there are people coming from all over to fish here. And of course, they're adding to the economy. They're staying somewhere and buying food and so forth. Henryville Fly Fishers has anglers from far and wide. Some of the clubs have people from New Hampshire, you know, Ohio, Maryland, Virginia, all coming here to fish.
Huh.
So it's not as publicized. It's not in the public eye, but it's there.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. You have any other questions? Well, that was fascinating, Don. Is there a question we should have asked you? Is there some aspect of this story or your life that we should have been talking about?
Not that I know of. No.
Well, that was fascinating.
The art, the fishing, the environmental work, and the teaching, but that's
Did you say where you taught? Was it Stroudsburg?
at Stroudsburg High School.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really had reservations of coming back to Stroudsburg to teach because I didn't become a really serious student until I went to college, and all my teachers were still there. My younger brother was a junior in school. I didn't want to come back to Stroudsburg, but my wife was, at that time, was a home economics major, and those jobs were harder to find. My department chair in college had a job lined up for me in Harrisburg, some great job in Harrisburg, but we decided we were going to get married. We decided we'd go where my wife found a job. My wife found a job at East Stroudsburg. So I looked at Delaware Valley, and I was told there were 2 openings at Stroudsburg, and I hesitated, but finally I went to Stroudsburg, and I was surprised. I was courted. I was, you know, almost lured into taking the job at Stroudsburg, and it worked out great. I mean, my former teachers, some of whom, for which I had not been a stellar student, were very welcoming, and my brother's friends. My first morning of school, they came into my homeroom and said, "Hello, Don," and I had to say, "Sorry, it's Mr. Baylor." And ever since, my brother in school would see me and say, "Hello, Mr. Baylor." But it was fun. I had a great time teaching there.
What year did you retire?
I retired after 30 years. I retired early, and that would have been 97. I retired early because there was an incentive program, and I had the environmental work to go to. And I liked teaching right up till the final day, but some of the red tape that goes along with it these days I could easily do without. So I got to the point where I felt I had been there and done that, and it's kind of like the environmental work. The rewards are not as frequent as you'd like, but once in a while you have a student who said they really appreciated some of the preparation, so it was rewarding.
Yeah. Great note to end on. Do you have anything else you would like to talk about? We'll call it a day.
I think that covers it. Yeah.
All right, well, thanks very much, Don.
Mm-hmm.